The scent of Parisian coffee and rain-soaked cobblestones was still fresh in my memory, a stark contrast to the sterile air of the private jet. I'd braced myself for a month of grueling negotiations, a battle of wits against a notoriously stubborn French conglomerate. The deal for Vance Innovations was a beast, and I, Elara Vance, had been prepared to tame it over weeks. I'd even made the difficult decision to send my daughter, Chloe, to my parents' house for the duration, not wanting her to be alone in the vast, empty silence of the Sterling estate. But the opposition folded. It was shocking, almost anticlimactic. Their resolve crumbled after a single intense week of discussions, leaving me with a signed contract and a bewildering void in my schedule. I felt untethered, the sudden quiet making my skin itch. I booked a flight home immediately, a strange, prickling intuition guiding me. I didn't call ahead. I told myself it was to surprise Chloe, but a deeper, more cynical part of me remained silent. The drive from the airport was a montage of fading autumn colors. I watched the city melt into the suburbs, then into the exclusive tree-lined enclave that housed the Sterling family home. It was a monument to old money and older traditions, a place I'd never quite fit into, no matter how many years I'd lived within its cold, perfect walls. My husband, Julian, had inherited it, and I'd inherited the role of its mistress. A role that always felt like a costume I hadn't quite tailored correctly. I paid the cab driver and stood for a moment at the imposing iron gates, taking in the familiar sight. The air here was different, crisp, clean, and heavy with unspoken expectations. I pushed the gate open, my suitcase rolling behind me like an obedient pet. The crunch of gravel under my wheels was the only sound. And then I saw him. A little boy, maybe 4 or 5 years old, with a mop of dark hair, was running wild, manic circles around the ancient magnolia tree that dominated the center of the garden. His laughter was high-pitched, a frantic sound that grated more than it cheered. I froze, my hand tightening on the suitcase handle. Guests. Julian's parents must be entertaining. This must be their grandchild. The thought was a neutral one, a simple explanation for an unexpected sight. I took a few steps closer, my professional smile already instinctively forming. And then it happened. His small foot caught on a raised root and he went down hard, face first into the grass. A sharp intake of breath was all I managed before the scene erupted. His initial shock melted into a scream so piercing it seemed to shred the very air. "Grandma! Grandma!" he wailed, his voice raw with a theatrical misery that felt instantly alien in this controlled environment. Before I could even move, the French doors to the conservatory flew open. My mother-in-law, Eleanor Sterling, a woman who usually moved with the glacial grace of a queen, scurried out, her face a mask of panic. Close behind her was Maria, our housekeeper of 20 years, her hands fluttering like nervous birds. Maria reached him first, gently helping the sobbing child to his feet. But it was Eleanor who swept in, scooping him into her arms with a tenderness I usually only saw her reserve for Chloe. "Hi, sweet boy. My darling, how did you fall?" she cooed, her voice an octave higher than I'd ever heard it. "Did the nasty tree trip you?" The boy, instead of being comforted, squirmed violently in her grasp. "Grandma, put me down," he demanded, his tears already subsiding into frustrated anger. The moment his feet touched the ground, he turned his fury on the tree, delivering a furious kick to its trunk. "Grandma, chop it down. Chop it down right now," he shrieked. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, he threw himself onto the lawn, rolling around in a full-blown tantrum, his screams echoing across the manicured grounds. "It's an awful tree. I hate it. I wish it would die." I stood there, utterly paralyzed. My mind, usually a whirlwind of analysis and strategy, had gone completely, utterly blank. The world had narrowed to this surreal tableau. The writhing child, the impeccably dressed grandmother kneeling in the grass, the horrified housekeeper. And the word he kept screaming. "Grandma." It echoed in my skull, bouncing off the walls of my sanity. "Grandma." Not Nana, the name Chloe used. "Grandma." The title was a claim, a branding. This wasn't a guest's child. The panic on Eleanor's face wasn't for a visitor's grandson. It was the panic of a matriarch whose deepest secret had just been unearthed. A coldness seeped into my bones, starting in my chest and spreading outwards until my fingertips were numb. This was no simple tantrum. There was a wild, unfocused energy to the boy, a lack of control that spoke of something more than just spoiled anger. Something was off. His shrieking reached a new crescendo, and in a sudden vicious movement he lashed out, his small foot connecting with Eleanor's shin. She gasped, more in shock than pain, her carefully composed features crumbling for a split second. My feet felt like they were cast in cement, rooted to the gravel path. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't process the reality that was crashing down around me. This child, this furious, broken little boy, was calling my mother-in-law grandma. And in that single horrifying word, the entire architecture of my life, my marriage, my trust, my future began to fracture. I saw the exact moment Eleanor registered my presence. Her head snapped up, her eyes locking with mine from across the garden. Her face, usually a masterclass in polite indifference, went pale. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. No sound came out. The carefully constructed facade of the Sterling family had, in an instant, been shattered by the screams of a child I had never known existed. And in that deafening silence I knew. I knew with a certainty that was both terrifying and absolute. The business trip, the sudden cooperation from the French, Julian's insistence that I go, that Chloe stay with my parents. It hadn't been convenience. It had been a strategy. A window. And I had returned a week early, catching them all in the act. The boys' screams were the soundtrack to my ruin. I was a statue in my own life, watching the betrayal play out before me, unable to look away. The world snapped back into focus with a painful high-definition clarity. The boys' screams, the panicked look on Eleanor's face, the scent of damp grass and my own cold fear, it all coalesced into a single devastating truth. The hum of the distant highway, a sound I'd never even noticed before, now roared in my ears like a tidal wave. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until my lungs burned. I forced air in, a ragged, shaky gasp that did nothing to steady me. My professional composure, my armor had been vaporized. I was just a woman standing on a gravel path, watching her life disintegrate. The crunch of tires on gravel was the next sound to cut through the chaos. A sleek, black sedan, Julian's car, pulled to a hasty stop near the garage. The driver's door flew open and he emerged, his expression one of irritated concern, no doubt summoned by the cacophony. He was still in his work clothes, a tailored charcoal suit that accentuated his broad shoulders, his tie slightly loosened. For a fleeting second the sight of him was an anchor. My husband. Here to make sense of this madness. His eyes scanned the garden, first taking in the scene of his mother trying to corral the thrashing child, then landing on me. His step faltered. The irritation on his face melted into something else entirely, pure, unadulterated shock, followed by a flash of panic so raw it was almost childlike itself. He recovered quickly, his public mask slamming back into place, but I had seen it. That single, unguarded moment was all the confirmation I needed. He strode past me without a word, his focus entirely on the boy. Alexander. Enough. His voice was sharp, a command that momentarily stunned the child into silence. Julian swooped down, effortlessly scooping the boy, Alexander, into his arms. The child immediately buried his face in Julian's neck, his sobs subsiding into hiccuping whimpers. The ease of the gesture, the natural way the boy clung to him, spoke of a familiar intimacy that felt like a physical blow to my stomach. Julian turned, finally meeting my gaze. His expression was a carefully constructed blend of apology and defiance. "Ilara," he began, his voice softer now, laced with a placating tone I knew all too well. "Let's go inside. I can explain." Those 4 words, "I can explain," ignited something inside me. The numbness receded, burned away by a sudden white-hot fury. Explain? What possible explanation could there be? What string of words could untangle this web of lies and betrayal? I found my voice, though it didn't sound like my own. It was low, flat, and terrifyingly calm. "There is no need." I followed them into the house, my legs moving on autopilot. The grand foyer, with its sweeping staircase and cold marble floors, felt like a museum of a life that was no longer mine. Julian carried Alexander into the living room, setting him down on an oversized cream-colored sofa. The boy immediately curled into a ball, thumb in his mouth, watching me with wide, suspicious eyes. I remained standing, my arms crossed over my chest, a feeble attempt to hold myself together. I was waiting for the performance to begin. Julian ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a nervous gesture he'd never quite been able to suppress. Alara, please, he started again, his voice a low murmur meant only for me, though his mother and Maria hovered nervously in the doorway. This isn't what it looks like. A bitter, incredulous laugh escaped my lips. It was a harsh, ugly sound. Really, Julian? What does it look like? Because from where I'm standing it looks like you have a son. A son who calls your mother, Grandma. It looks rather definitive. He flinched. His name is Alexander. And it's complicated. Uncomplicated, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was far more menacing than a shout. Start with his mother. Before he could answer, Alexander, perhaps sensing the tension or perhaps just because his fragile equilibrium had been disrupted again, began to cry. It wasn't the full-blown tantrum from outside, but a low, miserable whining. He clambered off the sofa and attached himself to Julian's leg, begging to be picked up again. Daddy, up. Up. Daddy. The word was a second dagger twisting deep inside me. Daddy. Chloe called him that. The sacred, simple title of fatherhood, now profaned, made common by this secret, broken child. Julian glanced down at him, then back at me, his expression torn. He was trapped between the child clinging to his leg and the wife staring him down. In that moment I saw the pathetic reality of his situation. This wasn't a powerful man. This was a coward, entangled in the consequences of his own secrets. The whining escalated. When Julian didn't immediately respond, Alexander's frustration boiled over. He detached himself from Julian's leg and with a sudden violent shriek ran across the room. His small arms swept across the coffee table, sending a crystal bowl of fruit crashing to the floor. Glass and grapes skittered across the Persian rug. Then, before anyone could react, he ran headfirst into the wall, a dull thud echoing in the sudden silence. Maria gasped. Eleanor cried out, Alexander, no. It was the horrible, deliberate self-destruction of it that finally broke through my frozen rage. This wasn't just bad behavior. This was a child in profound distress. He was not a healthy child. The thought was clear, clinical, a diagnosis made from a distance. Julian rushed to him, pulling him away from the wall, checking his forehead. The boy sobbed, limp now in his father's arms. I looked at Julian, holding his other son, his face pale with fear and shame. Any hope, any fleeting doubt that this was some monstrous misunderstanding evaporated. The past 10 years of our marriage, all our shared memories, the love I thought we'd built, it all curdled in that moment, becoming nothing more than an elaborate, cruel joke. I felt a profound ache rise in my throat, a sob I refused to release. I swallowed it down hard. I would not give him my tears. There's no need to explain, I repeated, my voice eerily calm once more. I looked straight at my husband, at the man I had built a life with. Just have your lawyer send the divorce papers to mine. Tonight. The words hung in the air, final and absolute. Julian's head jerked up. He looked from the crying child in his arms to me, his expression darkening with a sudden defensive irritation. The shame was being replaced by anger. A classic Julian Sterling maneuver. When cornered, attack. So this is how you ask for a divorce? He sneered, his voice losing its placating tone. You just come back from a trip, see something you don't understand and issue an ultimatum? Do you even think this makes sense? You won't even hear me out. His audacity was breathtaking. What exactly is there to explain, Julian? I shot back, my own anger finally igniting. The math is rather simple. You have a child. He is not mine. Ergo he is someone else's. What other variable am I missing? The why? I don't care about the what. My words were drowned out by another piercing scream from Alexander. The sound was like a drill in my skull. I flinched, the last of my composure straining to its limit. I looked at Julian, really looked at him. The man I had loved. The man I had advised, supported, stood beside. Julian, I said, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. What face do you have to stand there and explain anything to me? He had no answer. He just held his son closer and fell silent. There was nothing he could say. No lie could be spun large enough to cover this truth. I turned on my heel and walked out of the living room. I didn't run. I walked with a measured pace down the familiar hallway, up the grand staircase, and into the bedroom that had never truly felt like ours. I went to my walk-in closet and pulled out a single large suitcase. I didn't pack my life. I packed a capsule wardrobe. Efficient, practical pieces. I packed my passport, my laptop, the small fireproof box that held my important documents. I packed the first edition Jane Austen novel my father had given me when I graduated college. I was a CEO packing for an extended business trip. Because that's what this was. An extraction. A strategic retreat from a hostile takeover of my personal life. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, but he didn't come in. He stopped outside the door. I could feel him there, hovering. I zipped the suitcase closed, the sound final in the quiet room. I walked out, pulling the suitcase behind me. He was standing in the hallway, looking lost, Alexander still clinging to him, now quiet and watchful. "Alara, don't," he started, but his voice lacked conviction. I didn't even look at him. I walked down the stairs, across the marble foyer and out the front door. The cool evening air hit my face like a slap. I didn't look back at the house. I just started walking down the long driveway, the wheels of my suitcase bumping over the gravel, the only sound in the settling dusk. I was out. I was free. And the war was just beginning. The gravel crunched its final mocking symphony under my suitcase wheels as I reached the end of the Sterling driveway. The automatic security light above the gate clicked off, plunging me into the indigo twilight as if the house itself was erasing me. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the cold, free air, the enormity of the silence pressing in on me. There was no scream here. No why. Just the faint smell of wood smoke from a distant chimney and the steady, hammering beat of my own heart. I didn't call a cab. I needed to move to outpace the images seared behind my eyes. The boy's furious tantrum, Julian's panicked face, the word daddy hanging in the air like poison. I walked, my sensible heels clicking a determined rhythm against the asphalt, pulling my life in a single suitcase behind me. The houses in this neighborhood were set far back from the road, fortresses of light and warmth that felt a million miles away. I was an island of cold fury moving through the dusk. It took me 40 minutes to reach the hotel downtown. A sleek, modern tower of glass and steel, the antithesis of the Sterling's stone and ivy tradition. I booked a penthouse suite under my maiden name, Alara Vance. The clerk's polite, impersonal efficiency was a balm. Here I was not Julian Sterling's betrayed wife. I was a client. A woman with a corporate card and a purpose. The doors of the private elevator whispered open directly into the suite. It was vast, minimalist, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city's glittering skyline. I left my suitcase by the door and walked to the window. The world stretched out below, a circuit board of infinite possibilities. This was my domain. Not a gilded cage of old money and older betrayals. My phone felt heavy in my pocket. I pulled it out. No calls from Julian. No pleading texts. Just a void. His silence was its own answer. Confirmed everything. He was already retreating, fortifying his position, no doubt on the phone with his lawyer, not his wife. Fine. Two could play that game. I scrolled through my contacts and hit dial on a number I kept for emergencies. It rang twice. Miss Vance. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and utterly devoid of curiosity. Charles Wright. The best private investigator money could buy, and a man who understood discretion the way a sculptor understood marble. Charles. I have a job for you. My voice was steady, the same tone I used to greenlight a multimillion-dollar acquisition. Of course. I heard the faint click of a keyboard in the background. My husband. Julian Sterling. I need you to find someone for me. A woman. I didn't need to say more. He knew who Julian was. Everyone did. Understood. Description. I have neither. But he has a son with her. Approximately 4 to 5 years old. Name is Alexander. The boy has behavioral issues. The mother is likely kept somewhere discreet. Start with properties under shell companies, trusts, anything linked to Julian or the Sterling family holdings. I'll begin immediately. I'll need access to his financials, which you are authorized to provide as his spouse. I'll send the necessary documents for your e-signature. Do it. I ended the call. The first move was made. Next, I called Hannah Schmidt, my executive assistant. She answered on the first ring, her voice crisp and alert even at this hour. Alara, is everything all right? I thought you were in Paris. Plans changed, Hannah. I'm back. I need you to do something for me, and it requires absolute discretion. Always. I could hear her sitting up straighter, a pen already in her hand. I need you to compile a list of the top 5 divorce attorneys in the country. The sharks. The ones who specialize in high-net-worth, complex cases and who aren't afraid of the Sterling name. I want their profiles, their win records, and their availability for a consultation tomorrow. There was a beat of silence on the line. A tiny, almost imperceptible inhalation. But her voice was perfectly level when she responded. Right away, Alara. I'll have it for you within the hour. Thank you, Hannah. I hung up. I stood in the center of the silent, lavish suite. This was my war room. The first skirmish was over. I'd discovered the enemy's position. Now the counteroffensive began. My priority was clear. Protect Chloe. Protect my assets. Protect Vance Innovations. Julian's shamelessness was evident. He would fight for custody not out of love, but out of spite, out of a desire to maintain control, to project the image of a complete family. He would want my share of the family business, the one I'd built while propping up his own faltering empire. He would want to punish me for catching him. Well, he had another thing coming. I wouldn't leave him a single thing. I would keep my daughter, and I would keep every share, every dollar, every ounce of power I possessed. I would bury him. An hour later, as promised, Hannah's email arrived. Attached were 5 meticulously detailed profiles. I scanned them, my eyes landing on one name, David Chin. His bio was a list of corporate scalps and billionaire divorces. He was known for being ruthless, brilliant, and terrifyingly efficient. He was perfect. I emailed him directly, a concise 3-sentence summary of my situation and a request for a meeting at his earliest convenience. His response came back in under 10 minutes. Ms. Vance. My office. 8 a.m. tomorrow. I spent the next hour on the phone with my parents. I kept my voice light, breezy. The trip ended early. Yes, I'm fine. How's my darling Chloe? I listened to my mother's cheerful updates about my daughter's science project, her voice a lifeline to a world that still made sense. I ached to talk to Chloe, to hear her voice, but it was too late. She'd be asleep. I couldn't risk waking her and having to lie to her, not yet. The thought of her, innocent and happy, while her father's other life unraveled, sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. I ended the call promising to see them soon. After washing up, the hot water scalding my skin as if it could purify the day's contamination, I wrapped myself in a plush hotel robe and checked my phone. Another email from Charles Wright. He'd already begun his work. Miss Vance, it read. Mr. Sterling has hidden the woman with considerable care. I tailed him this evening after he left the estate. He was cautious, but I confirmed he keeps her at a standalone villa in the Oaks gated community. I'll send you the exact location. Be advised, this may not be the only property he uses. I will continue to investigate. A location pin dropped into my phone. River Garden Lane. A place for mistresses and secrets. I wired him his retainer, a cool $200,000, and sent a simple reply. Thank you, Charles. Please take care of this for me. I sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, staring at the pin on the map. A part of me, the part that had loved Julian, had hoped for a clean break. A peaceful dissolution. We could have talked. We could have parted with a shred of the dignity we'd once pretended to have. A peaceful divorce. That was all I'd initially wanted. But Julian had refused that path. He'd chosen silence. He'd chosen to fight for custody of our daughter, not because he was a devoted father. He'd never changed a diaper, never attended a parent-teacher conference without me scheduling it, but because it was a weapon. He would never allow a Sterling child, especially his heir apparent, to be raised outside of his control, outside of the family narrative. And I would never let him have his way. Even if Chloe wasn't raised within the gilded walls of the Sterling estate, she would want for nothing. She would have everything. She would have more. She didn't need a father like Julian. To her, he was nothing but a stain on her perfect heart, and I would be the solvent that erased him. I looked at the time. 11:47 p.m. The city lights twinkled below, indifferent. Sleep was impossible. The adrenaline was still coursing through me, a current of pure, undiluted purpose. I changed into black trousers, a simple sweater, and flat shoes. I didn't look like Alara Vance, CEO. I looked like someone who didn't want to be seen. I took the elevator down to the garage, got into my car, a sleek, electric sedan that was registered to my company, not my marital home, and entered the address Charles had sent me into the GPS. I was going to see the villa. I was going to look my husband's other life in the face. This wasn't about confrontation. Not yet. This was reconnaissance. I needed to see the scale of his deception for myself. I needed to fuel the fire that would keep me burning through the long legal battle ahead. The night swallowed the car as I drove towards the outskirts of the city, towards the secret he had kept from me for years. The war was no longer abstract. It had an address. The GPS guided me through the sleeping city, its voice a soft, synthetic murmur in the tense silence of the car. Each turn took me further from the bright, familiar core and into the hushed, manicured suburbs where privacy was the ultimate currency. The Oaks was exactly the kind of place I'd expect Julian to choose. Exclusive, tasteful, and utterly soulless. Every villa was a variation on a theme of bland luxury, set behind high gates and strategically placed foliage. I parked my car a block away from the address Charles had provided, killing the engine and sitting in the sudden, profound quiet. The air felt different here, still and expectant. This was where he came. This was the secret life running parallel to mine. The reality of it was a cold stone in my gut. I got out and walked, my flat shoes making no sound on the pristine pavement. The villa was at the end of a cul-de-sac, a modern, low-slung structure of glass and pale stone. It was dark, save for a single porch light. But in the driveway, illuminated under that soft glow, was Julian's car. Not just any car, his favorite, a vintage Jaguar he fussed over like a child. He told me it was in the shop for detailing. Another lie so easily offered. As I stood there, shrouded in the shadows of a large oak tree, a figure emerged from the side of the house. A man stamping his feet against the cold and rubbing his hands together. I recognized him instantly. Frank, Julian's personal assistant. Of course. The errand boy. The keeper of secrets. He was pacing slightly, looking anxious like he was waiting for something. Or someone. Then he saw me. He froze mid-step, his hands dropping to his sides, his face a perfect mask of sheer, unadulterated panic. It was almost comical. "And Mrs. Sterling?" he stammered, the words puffing out in a white cloud in the cold air. I didn't move. I just smiled, a cold, thin curve of my lips that didn't reach my eyes. "Frank. Working late, I see." I took a few steps closer into the circle of porch light. I never realized part of an assistant's job description included delivering his boss to his mistress. Does that come with overtime pay? His mouth opened and closed, a fish gasping on land. "Miss Vance." He finally settled on lowering his head, unable to meet my gaze. "I'm just following orders." "Aren't we all?" I murmured. I felt no real anger toward him. He was a pawn, a well-paid lackey. Making a scene with him was beneath me and a waste of energy. But he was also a means to an end. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a plain, black business card. It held only my name and a single private number. I held it out to him. "You have two choices, Frank." He looked at the card like it was a venomous snake. "First," I continued, my voice low and steady, "you can call Julian right now. I'm sure he's told you to cover for him, to tell me he's at a late meeting or out of town. But even if you do, I'll still see him. And you know what? He'll be humiliated that I caught him. And he'll be angry. And he'll take that anger out on you. He'll blame you for not being more careful, for not spotting me." I saw the truth of this hit him. He knew Julian's temper, his propensity for blaming messengers. "Compared to that," I said, letting a note of genuine amusement color my tone, "the second option is much better." I let out a quiet, conspiratorial laugh. "Forget that Julian is your boss. He's a sinking ship, Frank. Let me in. Quietly. Without alerting anyone inside. And after today resign. Come work for me at Advanced Innovations. I'll double whatever he's paying you. Triple it if your intelligence proves valuable." The hesitation on his face was brief, a fleeting battle between fear and greed. It was no battle at all. I wasn't surprised. The Sterling legacy was a fading photograph. Advanced Innovations was the future. He'd be an idiot to choose loyalty to a liar over a chance to join the winning team. He chose the second option. He used a keycard to silently disarm the gate and led me through a side entrance into a garden, then through a servant's door into the kitchen. The house was warm and smelled of lavender and something artificial like plug-in air fresheners. The moment I stepped inside, a wave of disorienting familiarity washed over me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The decor, it was a replica. The color palette, the style of furniture, even the art on the walls. It was a cheap, distorted echo of the Sterling Estate's living room. It was like walking into a funhouse mirror version of my own home. Julian, with his mild obsessive compulsion, his need for sameness, had tried to recreate his primary life here. He'd built a dollhouse for his secret family, furnished with knockoff versions of the life we shared. The effort was pathetic, a testament to his profound lack of originality. Frank smirked, a nasty, knowing look on his face. Creepy, right? He likes things the same. I ignored him, my skin crawling. I crept through the lower level, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The layout was indeed a copy. I knew exactly where the master bedroom would be. I moved toward the stairs, Frank trailing behind me like a nervous ghost. The door to the master suite wasn't fully closed. A sliver of yellow light spilled out into the hallway. And from within voices floated out. Her voice first, soft, saccharine, dripping with a cloying sweetness that made my teeth ache. Julian, when will you marry me? I don't want to be the woman behind your back anymore. Will you marry me? You can't let our children remain illegitimate forever. I stopped dead, my hand gripping the doorframe. Children. Plural. Then Julian's voice. Soothing, patronizing. The same tone he used to use on me when he wanted something. Just wait a little longer, Isabel. Don't make a fuss. I have to secure custody of my daughter before I can file for divorce. Isabel. Her name was Isabel. Her tone turned sour, petulant. We already have a son and a daughter of our own. Why do you need that child? That child. He was talking about my Chloe. My daughter. Reduced to that child. Rage, white-hot and pure, flashed through me. Julian's voice was firmer now, a warning edge to it. Grace grew up with me and my mother watching over her. Feelings like that aren't so easy to cut off. Don't start trouble, Isabel. He coaxed her for a long moment, his words a low murmur, and I heard her give a reluctant, watery laugh. The transaction was complete. Her pride soothed for another night. Then another sound. A small, toddling voice from down another hallway. Daddy. A little girl no more than 2 with curly dark hair, came wobbling out of a bedroom. She was followed by a sharp-looking middle-aged nanny who reached for her, afraid she might fall. The nanny's eyes lifted and met mine over the little girl's head. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a scream. Julian, hearing his daughter's call, came out of the bedroom smiling, ready to play doting father. But the first person he saw wasn't his little girl. It was me. He stiffened, his smile vanishing, his face draining of all color. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost. His own personal ghost, come to haunt his carefully constructed fantasy. Beside him, Frank, the traitor, smirked with open malice. Julian, he said, his voice dripping with false concern. You drove too fast. You didn't even notice something was following you. The audacity. The sheer, slimy betrayal from a man I'd just offered a job to. My hand itched to slap the look off his face. I raised my arm, but Julian was faster, moving to block me. Ilara, he said, trying to sound composed, but a tremor ran through his voice. He was trying to protect his assistant. His mistress's assistant. He looked at Frank, then back at me. He's 25. You're 34. Of course, he doesn't know how to speak properly. Why are you taking it so seriously? The air left my lungs. He was throwing my age in my face. Here, in the home of his mistress, surrounded by his illegitimate children, he was trying to weaponize the 9 years between us. I stood there, a strange calm settling over me. When love is gone, words lose all restraint. I had just never expected him to be this crude. I brought my hand down hard, but not on Frank. I put every ounce of my strength, every iota of my fury, into the slap that landed across Julian's own cheek. The crack echoed in the hallway like a gunshot. He lifted his head, staring at me in utter shock, a bright red imprint of my hand spreading across his face. From the bedroom doorway, Isabel gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. I had trained in self-defense since I was a child. My parents, grooming me to be the sole heir to an empire, had insisted on both strength and knowledge. That slap was not something easy to endure. Julian snarled, his eyes blazing with a hatred I'd never seen before. Ilara. You're insane. Frank, ever the loyal dog, quickly chimed in. How could you hit Julian like that? But before he could finish, I slapped him too. His head snapped to the side. His delicate skin swelled almost instantly on the left side of his face. The asymmetry bothered me. I couldn't stand it. So I slapped his right cheek hard to even it out. From the floor, Julian's little daughter, the bold one, started laughing. He thought it was a game. Julian shot her a look of pure displeasure and her laughter died. The four of us stood frozen in a tense, absurd standoff. Me, Julian, his crying mistress, his smirking, now symmetrically slapped assistant. Then Julian let out a cold, ugly laugh. "Ilara," he sneered, his eyes raking over me with contempt. "You're lunatic. Go look in the mirror and see how crazy you've become. Do you really think you're still young?" I almost laughed then. The pathetic irony of it. He was 6 years older than me. 40 this year. "Julian," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "Maybe you should be the one looking in the mirror." The silence in the hallway was thicker than the fog outside. It was a physical thing, choked with the aftermath of violence and the sour stench of betrayal. Julian's cheek glowed a livid red, a perfect map of my fury. Frank's face was a puffy, symmetrical mess of indignity. Isabel hovered in the doorway, a hand still pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a strange voyeuristic thrill. The little girl, startled into silence by her father's glare, stared at us all with wide, uncomprehending eyes. Julian's insult hung in the air, pathetic and weak. "Do you really think you're still young?" It was the desperate flail of a man who had nothing else, no real ground to stand on. No morality, no loyalty, no truth. All he had left was the pathetic attempt to wound me with the one thing I had never ever given a second thought: the relentless forward march of time. A cold, mirthless smile touched my lips. "Julian," I said, my voice low and steady, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Maybe you should be the one looking in the mirror." I let my gaze travel over him, from his perfectly styled hair that was now slightly askew, down to his expensive shoes. "You're 40 this year. Time might have been kind to your face, but it's done nothing for your character. It doesn't give you the right to use age as a weapon against me." I took a step closer, my own anger crystallizing into something harder, sharper. "When you were my age, if you'd made mistakes like these, you could have fathered a whole army of illegitimate children already." Frank's face darkened with a shame that wasn't his to own, but I was already done with him. Talking to people like him was like shouting into a void. They lacked the capacity for shame, for true understanding. They were just echoes. I turned my back on them. On the replica furniture, the crying mistress, the stunned assistant, and the man I had once called my husband. I walked out of the bedroom hallway, through the sickeningly familiar living room, and out the side door into the clean, cold night. I heard his footsteps behind me, heavy and quick on the path. "Ilara, wait." I didn't stop. I reached my car, my hand closing around the door handle. His hand closed over my arm, his grip tight, almost painful. I froze, every muscle in my body going rigid with revulsion. "I'm not your employee, Ilara," he said, his voice bitter, ragged. He was breathing heavily. "Is this really the way you treat me?" I didn't look at him. I stared straight ahead at the dark outline of the steering wheel. "Take your hand off me." Instead, he snatched the leather satchel from my other hand, the one containing my tablet, my notes, my life. "Ilara," he spat, his composure finally completely shattered. "Do you even understand why we've come to this? It's because of your attitude. You're always so high and mighty, always pointing out every flaw, every mistake. If you hadn't constantly criticized me, we wouldn't be here today." His eyes were bloodshot, glaring at me with a venom that felt years in the making. "What is the Vance family so desperate for money? Why do you always try to press me down? Do you know what people say about me out there?" His voice rose, nearly a shout in the quiet street. "They say I'm useless. That if it weren't for your guidance, I never would have gotten this far. Tell me, what man could ever accept that?" I looked at him then. Really looked at him. The man I'd met when he was 26, fresh off taking the helm of a floundering family company, his whole being filled with a desire to conquer the world. The man I'd advised, supported, loved. And inside, my heart felt like it was being ripped into 1,000 pieces. Just a month ago, he had carefully prepared a birthday gift for me, had held me close, and thanked me for helping him secure a government bid that had saved his company. And it wasn't just that. He had admitted himself over and over that I had helped him far too many times to count. From the beginning, he had been happy to sit back and reap the benefits. But now it had all curdled into this toxic, pathetic resentment. "You're terrifying," I whispered, the words leaving my lips before I could stop them. I didn't know when he had become this. Maybe what he truly despised wasn't the results themselves, but the fact that everyone knew he had achieved them because of me. He wanted the crown but couldn't bear its weight. He wanted everything both ways. How despicable. I yanked my bag back from his loose grip and, with a surge of pure adrenaline, kicked him hard in the shin. It was an inelegant, brutal move. He stumbled back with a grunt of pain and surprise, his balance lost on the perfect pavement. Do you remember what I told you the year we got married? My voice was louder now, ringing in the cold air. I said that if one day you stopped loving me, don't betray me. Just tell me. We'd divorce. We could part on good terms. Did you ever do that? The more I spoke, the more absurd it all seemed. The lies, the secret family, the sheer cowardice of it all. If you were so afraid people would think you were incapable, then why didn't you make decisions on your own? Why did you keep coming to me again and again, begging me to solve things for you? The memory was acid in my veins. You're the one who said I loved to play the teacher, yet you shamelessly begged me every time you hit a problem, asking me to come up with a way out. I took a step toward him and he actually flinched. Julian Sterling, how can a man be this shameless? You don't have some sudden sense of self-awareness. You're just insecure. You're a hollow man and you're terrified the world will hear the echo. Frank rushed out from the house then, taking in the scene. Julian hunched over, rubbing his shin, his face a mask of humiliation and rage. The assistant stepped in front of him, a pathetic human shield. Touch him again and see what happens, he squeaked, trying to sound threatening. Do you really think Julian won't fight back? I looked at Frank, then at Julian cowering behind him. A wave of pure, unadulterated disdain washed over me. Will he? I said, my voice cold. If he were going to, he would have already done it. It's not that he doesn't want to. It's that his body is worn out from booze and women. Even if he tried, he couldn't. I got into my car, the slam of the door a final, satisfying period at the end of our sentence. I started the engine and drove off, not wasting another second on the spectacle of their patheticness. I left them there in the driveway of their counterfeit life, the weakened lion and his sniveling jackal. But as I drove, the calm fury gave way to a churning, sickening regret. To say I felt nothing would be a lie. Julian and I hadn't exactly been childhood sweethearts, but we had known each other from a young age. Our social circles were small, overlapping Venn diagrams of old money and new ambition. Our paths had crossed at countless galas, fundraisers and sailing regattas. I remembered him taking over Sterling Corp at 26 after returning from his MBA abroad. He was the golden boy, the heir groomed since childhood. He came in with force and authority, a young king claiming his throne, and for a while he impressed everyone. But it didn't last. Without his parents' constant supervision, the company soon ran into trouble. The first major crisis was a PR disaster. Julian had fired a mid-level manager whose negligence cost the company $1 million contract. But the employee was clever. He was a small-time influencer. He uploaded a video, painting himself as a struggling single father, too worried about his sick child to focus, portraying Sterling Corp as a heartless monster for firing him. He cleverly glossed over the losses he'd caused. The video went viral. The company's reputation was dragged through the mud. Julian's attempts to clarify were clumsy, too late, and instantly twisted by the online mob. He was being called a bully, a monster. He was being dodged by partners and criticized in the press. It was around that time I attended a Sterling Corp board meeting. My father was a minor shareholder, a silent partner who collected dividends. He'd always brought me along, teaching me the ropes from a young age. By 18, he'd transferred shares from various companies to me, including a small stake in Sterling Corp. After that meeting, everyone else left except for Julian and me. He knew who I was. Miss Vance, he'd said, forcing a weary smile. What brings you here? When did you return to the country? I'd smiled, stood up and shook his hand. It's been a while. Looks like President Sterling isn't doing too well today. He'd given a wry, defeated laugh and admitted it. And I'd laughed too, thinking he had an unusually good temper for a man under siege. Back then he was young with a scholarly air he hadn't yet shed. When I brought up the male employee's case, his face had carried a hint of resistance. Miss Vance, since when have you been so interested in our company's affairs? Because I'm a shareholder, I'd answered naturally. Of course I want Sterling Corp to do well. It concerns my dividends at the end of the year. He chuckled, glancing at me. 22? You can't have graduated yet. I've graduated, I'd replied calmly. I went abroad when I was 16. Of course I've graduated by now. His look of surprise, the immediate relaxation when he found a common alma mater. The way he'd begun chatting about campus stories, the distance fading. He'd asked why I chose Cornell. My parents fell in love there, I'd told him. I thought it was meaningful. He'd smiled and explained his own reasoning, saying he'd chosen it for its culture. When the topic shifted to the company, he'd grown animated, speaking rapidly about his ideas. He had two plans: let the scandal die on its own or bring the employee back and have him recant. Both were terrible passive strategies. I'd listened, then gently, in the kindest tone I could manage, dismantled them. I'd explained why reputation was everything, why letting it die was a time bomb, why taking the liar back would demoralize every other employee and confirm public suspicion. I'd laid out my plan. A full, transparent, aggressive investigation. Police involvement. Total exposure of the facts. And then I'd handed him the coup de grace. I'd already investigated the employee. The single father was a lie. He'd divorced his wife because he cheated, refused to pay child support, and would rather gamble. I'd already contacted the ex-wife. She was willing to testify. The look on Julian's face, the shock, the awe, the profound gratitude. He'd leapt to his feet, thanking me profusely. To me it had been a simple puzzle, a fun exercise in crisis management. To him it must have seemed like salvation. He'd adopted every one of my suggestions and I'd implemented them in my own company as well. When both our corporations gained praise for our new humane employee policies, even receiving official coverage, he'd proposed to me. At 22 I'd said yes. I truly believed that for the next 50 years, we would remain loving partners in both marriage and business. Looking back now, it felt ridiculous. Because before we even reached the so-called 7-year itch, Julian was already cheating. And I had no idea. That was my blindness. My naive optimism. My foolish belief that feelings could remain unchanged forever. During those countless nights when Julian betrayed me, I imagine he looked down on me with the disdain and contempt he'd shown tonight. Later, perhaps he even thought I would never discover it. 7 years. He'd managed to hide it from me for 7 whole years. Now, when I think back, I don't even know why I was with him in the first place. I never thought he had any true business talent. He'd trapped me in the name of love, and I'd trapped myself too. I should have been sharper, more vigilant. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in streaks of pink and orange as I pulled into the underground garage of my hotel. I didn't go up to my room. I went straight to the business center, then up to the office space I'd had Hannah secure for me on a different floor. On the way, I sent a message to Sarah, the nanny who looked after Chloe at my parents' house. Remind Mom to make lotus seed soup for Chloe's breakfast. It's her favorite. Then I considered whether I should let Chloe take a break from school, give her some time to rest at home, shielded from the coming storm. After thinking it over, I decided to wait until she woke up. I thought about calling her to ask her opinion. Even though she was young, I had always respected her thoughts. She had always loved going to school, loved learning new things, competitive and ambitious just like I had been at her age, determined to excel in everything. But when she was 7 and became obsessed with Sudoku, spending 3 hours straight bent over puzzles, I'd actually felt a little afraid. I'd secretly asked everyone in the family if anyone had been pressuring her to study, but everyone denied it. Left with no choice, I went straight to the source. Her answer was simple. She was interested. She told me she was curious about everything. Every skill fascinated her. She said she wanted to be like me. Straight A's, broad interests, advancing grades ahead of schedule. There was no other reason. He just wanted to resemble me more. A child being ambitious from such a young age is indeed a good thing, but my heart ached for her. When it was me, I had thought all of that was normal. But watching my daughter take on so much, I worried she was putting too much pressure on herself. From the moment she was born, my only wish for her was to live happily and joyfully. Yet somehow I had given birth to a miniature version of myself. I'd watched her closely for a long time, keeping her company whenever I could, until finally my worries eased. She really was a child who seemed destined for greatness. Her personality was excellent. She was polite, quick-witted, and remarkably patient. She picked things up faster than most. She learned tennis in an hour. She was always far ahead of kids her age in running. She even wanted to learn martial arts and rock climbing. So Julian and I let her try. At first we worried she might be afraid, but soon we saw how much she enjoyed it. That's when I finally felt reassured. She had stayed with my parents for half a year once, and they loved her so much they hated to send her back. They always said she was my mini-me, identical to me as a child. The memory was a comfort and a pain. I had to protect that light in her. I had to ensure Julian's darkness never touched her. I walked into my new temporary office. It was blank, impersonal, ready to be filled with strategy. I sat down at the desk, the first rays of the morning sun streaming through the window. The unraveling was complete. Now it was time to rebuild. For me. For Chloe. The sterile light of the office fluorescents couldn't compete with the dawn bleeding into the skyline. I'd been staring at a spreadsheet for an hour, but the numbers were just a blur. My mind was a courtroom and I was prosecuting the ghost of my marriage over and over again. The slap, the scream, the word daddy, they played on a loop, each repetition etching the betrayal deeper. My phone buzzed, shattering the grim reverie. Anna. Alara, your 8 a.m. with David Chin is confirmed. He's cleared his entire morning. Also, your mother-in-law is in the lobby. The air left my lungs. Eleanor. Here. Of course. Julian would send his mother to do his dirty work, to appeal to emotion where he had failed with brute force. The old lioness coming to defend her cub. Send her up, I said, my voice flat. I needed to see this. I needed to look the architect of Julian's entitlement in the eye. A few minutes later, the elevator dinged softly, and Eleanor Sterling stepped into my corporate domain. She looked out of place amidst the modern chrome and glass, a relic of a more ornate era in a tailored cream suit, a single strand of pearls at her throat. Her eyes, usually so cool and assessing, were red-rimmed. The moment she saw me, her composure broke. Alara, she cried, her voice cracking as she rushed forward, not with grace but with a desperate, stumbling gait. She collapsed into the chair opposite my desk, burying her face in her hands. Sobs racked her slender frame, years of practiced poise evaporating. I waited. I said nothing. I simply watched the performance. After a moment, she lifted her head, tears tracing paths through her impeccable makeup. How can you just take Chloe away? She wailed, the sound raw and grating. She's the child I've raised. She's a Sterling. How dare you take her? The audacity was breathtaking. She had raised her? I bit the inside of my cheek hard, letting the metallic taste of blood anchor me. She sobbed harder, her words becoming a torrent of self-pity. And that so-called grandson Julian brought back last month. All he does is cry, hit people. He's nothing like Chloe. He's not even close to her. He's damaged. She spat the word out like it was poison. I want to take Grace home. I need her. So that was it. The secret son was a disappointment. A flawed product. And she wanted to return to the original, perfect model. My daughter. My Chloe. I stood up, unable to sit across from her any longer. I walked to the window, my back to her. I have a meeting, Eleanor. But she was up in a flash, blocking my path to the door. Alara, are you really going to divorce? Her voice took on a wheedling, pragmatic tone. The tears had stopped as suddenly as they'd started. If you don't divorce, everything in the Sterling family will one day be Chloe's. Everything. I drew in a long, slow breath, summoning every ounce of patience I didn't possess. She was trying to dangle the very crown I'd helped polish in front of me, as if I were a mercenary who could be bought off with the promise of future riches. I turned to face her, my expression glacial. Even if we divorce, I said, my voice low and precise, if Chloe ever wants Sterling Corp, I can get it for her anytime. I let the words hang in the air, watching her eyes widen. Acquiring a company has never been a problem for me. From the very beginning, I knew Vance Innovations would outgrow the Sterlings. I took a step closer. That's why Julian and I signed a prenuptial agreement before marriage, separating our assets completely. Each of us manages our own finances. No overlap. I gave her a thin, cold smile. That way he can't touch a cent of mine. Now as for what little he does have, I may not care for it. But when it comes to Chloe's share, I'll fight for every bit. None of it will ever go to his illegitimate children. I saw the calculation in her eyes die, replaced by a flicker of fear. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a near whisper. As for the future, I will simply watch as Julian drags his company down, step by step, until the capital chain collapses and he is forced to declare bankruptcy. When that time comes, I will step in. The so-called Sterling Corp will serve as an early training ground for my daughter. I looked at her, this woman who had always viewed me as a necessary modern infusion into their stagnant bloodline. Back then you always wanted me and Julian to have another child. Even after we made it clear Chloe would be our only daughter, you never gave up. Her face softened momentarily, a genuine memory breaking through. But as Chloe grew older, she was so easy. So delightful. A real smile touched her lips. No matter what it was, if it involved Chloe, I wanted to handle it myself. She was so clingy, always sticking close. Her voice trailed off, lost in the recollection of afternoons at the park, of braiding my daughter's hair, of a love that had for a time felt real. Whenever Chloe wasn't in school, her grandmother had insisted on taking her everywhere. Even when meeting old friends for tea, she'd bring Chloe along. Afterward, they'd go to the amusement park. She'd been afraid that if she bragged too much about Chloe's brilliance, it would spark envy. So she'd forced herself to change her old habit of showing off. Starting from the second year she helped raise Chloe, she'd stopped pressing me to give Julian another child. Sometimes, when her old friends sighed that it was a pity Chloe wasn't a boy, she would speak up immediately, telling them to mind their own business, declaring that even 100 grandsons could not compare to Grace. Thinking about it now made my chest tighten. For all those years I had truly wanted to believe her love for Chloe was real. Heartfelt. But the tears she'd shed today weren't for Chloe. They were for herself. For the disruption of her life. For the disappointing grandson who was not the heir she'd hoped for. The balance in her heart had shifted. I knew she wanted Chloe. After raising her for 10 years, of course there were deep feelings. But I had reason to believe that if Julian's son had been as bright, as well-mannered, as clever as Chloe, she would have abandoned her too. In the end, his fight for Chloe was nothing more than a calculation. Love measured against gain and loss. But Chloe never needed that kind of conditional love. And I would never make decisions for her. Whatever path she chose, it would be her choice. "Get out, Eleanor," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. She looked stunned, as if I'd physically struck her. She opened her mouth to protest but saw the finality in my eyes. Without another word, she straightened her suit, lifted her chin and walked out, the ghost of the matriarch she once was. I stood there for a long time, watching the city fully awaken below. The meeting with David Chin was a brutal, beautiful thing. He was everything I needed. Sharp, ruthless and impeccably informed. He already knew about Alexander. He'd already begun drafting motions. We spoke the same language, not of emotion but of strategy, leverage and assets. "He'll go for custody to pressure you on the financials," Chin stated, not looking up from his tablet. "It's a standard tactic. We'll counter with everything. His adultery, the instability of the other household, the child's issues. We'll demand psychological evaluations for all parties. We'll make it so ugly and so public that he'll beg to settle." It was exactly what I wanted to hear. The divorce proceedings were a swift, clinical dissection. Julian, advised by a lawyer who was clearly out of his depth against Chin, vacillated between defiance and defeat. We met in conference rooms that smelled of lemon polish and resentment. He'd glare at me and I'd meet his gaze with a placid, uninterested look, as if he were a mildly irritating spreadsheet I had to correct. We finally signed the final papers in his lawyer's office. The air was thick with unspoken words. As the movers I'd hired carried out the last boxes from my study at the estate, my books, my research, the antique reprint volumes of economic theory that were mine long before I was his, Julian stood in the doorway. He watched me, a strangely satisfied look on his face, as if by forcing me to leave he had somehow won. As if my departure was a testament to his power, not his failure. He watched as I hefted the last heavy volume into a box. "Ilara," he said, his voice calm, feigning a generosity that rang utterly false. "No matter how capable you are, you still couldn't keep your marriage." His tone was measured, even magnanimous, but I knew inside he was unraveling. Otherwise he wouldn't have made a point to be here. He thought he was here to humiliate me, but all I saw was a man forcing a performance to hide the emptiness and jealousy rotting inside him. I turned and smiled at him, a genuine smile that made him blink in confusion. "Julian Sterling," I said, my voice light. "Just wait and see. Fortune turns, and when it turns against you, it crushes hard." He wouldn't be smiling for long. Leaving this marriage wouldn't hurt me. In fact, it was a blessing. A fortunate woman doesn't belong in an unfortunate household. It was Julian who had lost me, and I would watch to see just how long he could keep laughing. A wise person knows themselves. Unfortunately, he never did. You can't compare to Isabel at all, he sneered, the mask slipping to reveal the petulance beneath. She's gentle, kind, attentive. She makes me hangover soup when I'm drunk, ties my tie before meetings, even washes my underwear while carrying my child. That's what a real wife does. But you, a domineering woman like you, will never get real love. The image was so pathetic, so cheap, it barely sparked anger. Just a profound, weary disgust. I kicked him hard in the waist, a swift, efficient motion that sent him stumbling back into the doorframe with a grunt. He lifted his head, glaring at me with pure hatred. Did I ever stop you from fighting back? I asked indifferently. Your assistant is attentive because his livelihood depends on you. But between us, weren't you the one always running to me for help? If we're going by your logic, shouldn't it have been you doing these thoughtful things for me? Why have I never seen you fulfill your duty? I took a step closer. He flinched. You call me domineering, but isn't it only because I had a useless husband? For a wife, strength becomes a necessity. I sighed, a sound of genuine pity. What choice did I have when fate gave me a husband like you? I was 5 feet 10 inches, always keeping up my fitness. Julian, 6 foot, hadn't had abs in years. Standing there now with his waist bent, he looked worn down, defeated. It almost made me look condescending, but the truth was obvious. No brains, no strength, no wonder he was so insecure. I couldn't help but sigh from the heart. Julian, someone like you isn't even fit to be a decorative pillow. I clicked my tongue twice. After all, age is catching up with you. No matter how you insult me, it won't hide the fact that you're utterly dependent on your mistress. Julian, blind to danger, shot back. You really think you're that special? I met his eyes and spoke clearly, word by word. I am an international-level track athlete. A first-class swimmer. A first-class diver. A first-class wrestler. Since I was a child, I've won every kind of academic competition. Year after year, I was an outstanding student. I won gold medals in the physics and chemistry Olympiads. Later, when I studied abroad, I graduated with straight A's. I double-majored in physics and mathematics. I took a final step until I was looking down at him. And you, what do you have? What exactly do you think gives you the right to look down on me? What would I ever need to feel insecure about? Tell me one way in which you could possibly compare. I let the silence answer for me. At 40 years old, when trouble comes, the only thing you know how to do is run home to your wife. What qualification do you have to despise me? My voice grew calmer the more I spoke. Julian Sterling, men like you with no ambition yet overflowing with pride, deserve to achieve nothing. Remember, it was you who came to me back then. I never begged you to marry me. So don't look at me with that expression as if you were the prize and I was desperate. If I had the chance to choose again, I wouldn't give you a second glance. I picked up my box. Even if you were the one marrying into my family, you still wouldn't be worthy. The fact that you've been with me for over 10 years is already more than you deserved. Without me, you know perfectly well what would have become of your company. Without me, who would still call you President Sterling? I walked to the door, forcing him to move aside. Take a good look in the mirror. Why is it that after all these years, people still call you my husband instead of calling me your wife? Why has no one ever thought I lived off you? Isn't that enough proof? It means you're worthless. By the end, my voice wasn't even raised. I simply laid out the facts in every aspect. You're nothing. You can't out-negotiate me. You can't outlast me physically. Your thinking is rigid and inflexible. What do you have that's worth showing off? I gave him one last, dismissive glance. Back then, being with you was your fortune, Julian, not mine. I walked out of the Sterling estate for the last time, the box in my arms feeling not like a burden but like my freedom. I didn't look back. I had a company to run, a daughter to raise, and a future to claim. His pathetic echo of a life was no longer my concern. The gambit was over. I had checkmated the king, and the board was now mine alone. The silence after the storm was not peaceful. It was a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. In the weeks that followed the divorce, I filled the void with a relentless, almost manic energy. Vance Innovations became my monastery, my fortress, my revenge. I worked 16-hour days, pushing into emerging markets, acquiring promising startups, poaching Sterling Corp's most disgruntled talent. My desk was a landscape of financial reports and strategic plans, each document a brick in the wall I was building between my new life and the wreckage of the old. I avoided the society pages, but news has a way of seeping through the cracks. Hannah, with her impeccable discretion, would sometimes leave a clipped article on my desk, her way of keeping me informed without forcing me to dwell. The headlines were subtle at first, then increasingly less so. Sterling Corp's new efficiency drive draws employee ire. CEO Julian Sterling's controversial media blitz. Compassion is a corporate liability. He was dismantling everything. Every policy we'd built together, every humane reform I'd championed, was being systematically erased. He'd cancelled parental leave, enforced a brutal 996 work culture, and gave speeches praising ruthless competition, all while publicly criticizing longtime employees as dead weight. He was trying to prove a point, to show the world, to show me, that he didn't need my soft guidance, that he could be the hard-edged titan he imagined himself to be. The result was a predictable exodus. His best people, the heart of that company, started showing up in my HR department's inbox. I welcomed them. Their bitterness was my fertilizer. He also, predictably, mentioned me. In interviews, he'd make veiled references to former advisors who lacked a killer instinct, who held the company back. He was trying to pick a public fight to draw me into his circus. I never took the bait. My silence was a louder condemnation than any rebuttal I could have issued. To the world, I was Alara Vance moving forward. He was Julian Sterling thrashing in the mud he'd made. My personal life was a quieter, more sacred space. Chloe was with me full-time now, a radiant, curious presence that kept me grounded. We had moved into a stunning penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and a terrace garden. It was a home I had chosen for us, a place with no ghosts. We spent our evenings there, her telling me about her advanced physics project while I cooked, or us simply sitting together, reading in a comfortable silence that felt like healing. She never asked about him. Not once. It was a silence that spoke volumes. She was too smart, too perceptive not to have pieced things together. Her loyalty was a quiet, fierce thing, and it was all mine. The call came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was in back-to-back meetings, my mind buzzing with the details of a new AI integration. My personal phone, the one only a handful of people had, lit up. It was my best friend, Lillian. She'd called 3 times in a row. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I excused myself and stepped into the empty hallway. Lil? What's wrong? Her voice was breathless, crackling with a kind of horrified excitement. Alara. Oh my God. Are you sitting down? Just tell me. It's Julian. And Isabel. They've been taken in for questioning by the SEC. It's all over the financial wires. The world tilted slightly. I leaned against the cool glass wall of the corridor. What happened? The exhaustion of days of meetings vanished, replaced by a cold, clear alertness. Lillian launched into the story, her words tumbling over each other. His company's been in a tailspin for months, you know that. Suppressed by competitors, barely turning a profit. Rumor is, Isabel started making trouble, saying he was incompetent. At first he tolerated it, but then she used that boy as a weapon, mocking him in front of his friends, his investors, until he couldn't lift his head. I could picture it perfectly. Isabel, realizing the golden goose was sick, turning on him. Julian, his pride, his most vulnerable organ. So, Lillian continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, Julian, being Julian, found himself a younger woman on the side. Some in turn, from what I hear. Of course he did. The pattern was as predictable as it was pathetic. Isabel went ballistic. They've been fighting like cats and dogs, tearing each other apart in public. He's not talking about marrying her anymore. God, Alara, she's even worse. She convinced herself their son's problems were because Julian wouldn't pay for some exclusive, ultra-expensive private academy. She was desperate, listening to all the wrong people. People who were probably working for Sterling Corp's competitors. I closed my eyes. I could see the dominoes falling. One after the other. Under their encouragement, Lillian said, the words heavy with implication, she embezzled company funds. A lot of them. Tried to funnel the money into some shady educational trust. The SEC caught it. They've taken both of them in for questioning. It's a mess. A beautiful, glorious mess. I stood there in the silent, sleek hallway of my thriving company, and felt a surge of pure, unadulterated exhilaration. It was a dark, primal feeling and I embraced it. He had truly not disappointed me. He hadn't made me wait long at all. Well, I have to go. Thank you. I hung up before she could respond. I walked back into my meeting but my mind was elsewhere. I ended the session abruptly, citing a family emergency, which in a way it was. The emergency of my former family finally imploding. Back in my office, I stood at the window watching the rain streak down the glass, blurring the city into an impressionist painting. I felt no pity. Only a profound, vindicated certainty. I picked up the phone and called Hannah. Hannah, announced to the company that this month, every employee's bonus will be tripled. There was a brief, stunned silence on the other end. Tripled? Alara, that's incredible. The team will be thrilled. I could hear the smile in her voice. And schedule a mandatory meeting for all department heads. Tomorrow morning. 7 a.m. Of course, she said, her professional tone returning. What's the meeting about? I watched a single raindrop trace a path down the window pane. It's about acquiring my ex-husband's company. My voice was cool, calm, the same tone I used to approve a coffee order. Let's make sure he ends up penniless. She answered without a hint of hesitation. Right away, Alara. I hung up. The ancient saying floated into my mind. When one man falls, the world piles on. It was true. Everything happening to Julian Sterling now, he deserved every bit of it. He had built his own coffin and Isabel had happily provided the nails. The acquisition was a foregone conclusion. Sterling Corp, hollowed out by bad policies, bled dry by embezzlement, and led by a man whose reputation was in tatters, was a sinking ship. My team moved with the precision of a surgical strike. We offered pennies on the dollar and Julian's board, desperate to salvage anything, practically begged us to take it off their hands. They were drowning and I was the only one with a lifeboat. I made sure they knew it. The process took 2 months. 2 months of watching Julian's empire be dismantled, asset by asset, holding by holding. His name disappeared from the letterhead, from the headlines, replaced by mine. Those who had once praised him, who had laughed at his jokes and clapped him on the back, now averted their eyes when his name was mentioned. He became a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms before moving on to more pressing business. The day the deal was finalized, I brought Chloe to the office. We stood in my conference room, the same room where I had first met David Chen. The documents were signed. Sterling Corp was now a wholly owned subsidiary of Vance Innovations. Chloe, now 11 going on 40, stood beside me, her hand in mine. She looked out at the view, then up at me, her expression serene, her eyes wise beyond their years. Mom, she whispered, her voice clear and calm. I'm proud of you. In that moment, everything I had endured, the betrayal, the humiliation, the sleepless nights, the furious struggle, clicked into place and was worth it. It was all worth it because she understood. Because she saw the strength it took not to break. Because she chose me. I squeezed her hand, my throat too tight to speak. As for Julian, he faded into the background. A man who had once been given everything. A thriving company, a brilliant wife, a perfect daughter, and had squandered it all for the cheap thrill of a secret. He became a footnote in my story, a lesson learned. And Isabel Shin? She became just another forgotten scandal, a flash of tabloid headlines before the world moved on to the next piece of gossip. A cautionary tale about what happens when you build your life on someone else's foundation. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. True victory was never about revenge. It was about freedom. Walking out of that marriage hadn't broken me. It had set me free. I had my daughter, my company, and my future, unbent and unbroken. I closed that chapter of my life without looking back. Julian Sterling had been a mistake, but one I would never repeat. The road ahead was mine alone, and I would walk it with grace, with Chloe at my side. Together we would build a life where no one, not betrayal, not envy, not weakness, could ever touch us again. That was the true victory. And it was only the beginning. The penthouse was silent, save for the soft, rhythmic clicking of Chloe's knitting needles. She'd taken up the hobby recently, a surprising contrast to her usual high-speed pursuits of quantum physics lectures and advanced rock climbing. She said it helped her think. A ball of cashmere the color of a stormy sky rested in her lap, slowly transforming into something complex and beautiful under her deft fingers. I watched her from across the room, my heart performing that familiar, painful expansion it did whenever I truly stopped to look at her. She was the best of me. The best of my father's quiet intelligence and my mother's relentless heart. She was wholly, completely herself. It had been a year since the acquisition. A year of silence from the Sterlings. The news cycle had chewed them up and spat them out. Julian's name was now synonymous with corporate hubris and spectacular failure. Isabel had vanished, likely to some nondescript suburb with her children, living off whatever scraps Julian had left after the SEC fines and legal fees. I never inquired. They were phantoms, echoes from a life that no longer belonged to me. My life was here. In this airy, light-filled space high above the city. In the relentless, thrilling hum of Vance Innovations, which was now stretching its tendrils into industries I'd only dreamed of a decade ago. And in this quiet, in the company of my daughter. My phone buzzed on the glass coffee table. Hannah. I picked it up. Elara. It's done. The final restructuring of the Sterling subsidiary is complete. The last of the old board has been bought out. It's fully integrated. It's yours. There was a note of finality in her voice. A chapter truly closed. Thank you, Hannah. For everything. Of course. The paperwork is on your desk. Oh, and the press release is drafted for your approval. We're announcing the new Vance Futures wing next week, with Chloe listed as the primary beneficiary and chair of the Youth Innovation Board. A smile touched my lips. Perfect. I ended the call and placed the phone back on the table. Chloe looked up, her eyebrows raised in question. It's official, I said. The last piece of your father's empire now belongs to you. To do with as you see fit. She didn't smile. She simply nodded, her gaze thoughtful. It was never an empire, Mom. It was just a company. A poorly managed one. She returned to her knitting, her focus absolute. We'll do better. The word was a gift. She saw her future intertwined with mine, not as an heir to be groomed but as a partner. A collaborator. Later that evening, after Chloe had gone to bed, I stood on the terrace. The city was a sprawling galaxy of light below me. The air was cool and clean. I held a glass of wine, not drinking it, just feeling the weight of the bowl in my hand. I thought about the past not with bitterness, but with a strange, distant curiosity. Like an anthropologist examining the ruins of a lost civilization. I thought of Julian not with hatred but with a profound, weary pity. He was a man who had been given a map to buried treasure and had instead used it to light a fire to keep himself warm for a single night. His weakness wasn't his infidelity. That was merely a symptom. His weakness was his inability to see strength in anything but its most brutish, domineering form. He could not comprehend a partnership of equals. He could only see a hierarchy, and he had to be at the top, even if the throne was made of cardboard and the kingdom was a fiction. He had called me domineering. But true strength, I had learned, wasn't about domination. It was about resilience. It was the strength of a river that carves canyons not through force, but through persistence. It was the strength to bend without breaking. To be soft with those you love and unyielding in your principles. To build rather than to conquer. I had built this. This life. This company. This relationship with my daughter. I had built it from the rubble he had left me. And it was stronger, more beautiful, and more authentic than anything we had ever pretended to have together. The sliding glass door opened behind me. Chloe stepped out, wrapped in a blanket, her knitting replaced by a thick book on astrophysics. Couldn't sleep? I asked. Too many ideas, she said, coming to stand beside me. She leaned her head against my arm. We stood in silence for a long time, watching the endless motion of the city. Do you ever miss him? She asked quietly. The question didn't surprise me. He was a scientist. She sought data even on the human heart. I considered it. Did I miss the man? No. Not for a second. But I missed the idea of what I'd thought we were building. I missed the companion I'd believed was walking beside me. I missed the idea of him, I said honestly. But not the reality. The reality was small. She nodded, absorbing this. I don't miss him, she said, her voice clear and certain. I miss the dad I thought I had. The one in the stories. But the real one, he was always too loud. And he never listened. Her perception was a scalpel. Precise and true. He never did listen. Not to me, not to her, not to the quiet truth of things. You know, she said, looking up at me, her face illuminated by the city's glow. What he said about you about being domineering, it was because he was scared. You weren't a mirror he wanted to look into. I looked down at my daughter, at this old soul in a young body, and felt a love so fierce it was almost terrifying. How do you know that? He shrugged. It's obvious. You wanted a reflection that made him look bigger. You just showed him what was really there. She went back to looking at the lights. I'm glad you're my mirror. Tears pricked my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I put my arm around her and pulled her close. Me too, baby. Me too. We stood there until the night grew cold. The future stretched out before us, vast and unwritten. It was not a path away from the past, but a new direction altogether. There would be other challenges, other heartbreaks, other triumphs. But they would be ours. Forged on our terms. I had gone into my marriage believing love was a fortress you built with someone. I had learned it was a garden you tend alone, and you only allow in those who know how to cherish the growth. Julian had chosen his path. A path of petty secrets and smaller rooms. A path that led to obscurity. I had chosen mine. It was wider. It was brighter. And it was filled with a grace that had nothing to do with a name and everything to do with the extraordinary young woman standing beside me, silently mapping the stars. The truest victory was not in the acquisition of a company or the humiliation of an enemy. It was in this quiet, unshakable peace. It was in the freedom to look at the horizon and see not an ending, but a limitless, brilliant beginning. Our beginning. And it was ours alone. The end.